Hey all, Scott here, and I can't wait to finally head to this game controller issues meeting I just found out about.
Yeah, misread that pretty bad.
Whoa, my hands are doing this! And it wouldn't be possible without the overlooked messiah of all video games, the controller. The pathway between you and the world within the screen. A game controller needs to house all the necessary input methods for games in its era, while also being incredibly transparent. It's best when it just melts into your hands and you don't have to think about where the B button is, it's just all second nature. However, the road to where we are now has been a rocky one. We've gone from to even. And that road started way early on. Video games need to be controllable to be considered games. So even back in the early days of scientists pissing around and making games on supercomputers instead of curing diseases, they had to create ways to play the games, like with the tried and true knob and button combo used for Tennis for Two in 1958. When arcade machines hit the scene, developers had to design the controls for each of their games, and thus their imagination wasn't compromised by limiting control methods. They could create whatever control method would suit their game best. Joysticks, trackballs, knobs, buttons, steering wheels, each arcade machine was different from the last in terms of controls, so when home video game consoles were in development, there was definitely a hurdle to overcome. Developers were used to having free range with how to control their games in the arcade. How do you create a controller that can be a jack of all trades, one that can work with all or at the very least a lot of the games released at the time? Atari said and gave us a button and a stick. The Atari 2600 was the first major success in terms of home video game consoles with interchangeable cartridges. The first video game console ever, 1972's Magnavox Odyssey, sure did have a controller alright. The Fairchild Channel F predated the 2600 by a year, releasing in 1976 and has you holding a Snickers bar to control games. But the Atari 2600's joystick is definitely what the general public sees as the first video game controller, and definitely one of the most iconic. While its simplicity made many games harder to convert to the system, it's undeniable it played a key role in its success. No matter who you are, you look at this thing and say, yeah, that makes sense. How could you possibly screw this up? It's a giant red button and a rod. Anybody who's anybody knows what that's about. When you look back at video game successes in the early days, it's apparent that success came with controls that were easy enough for the general consumer to understand, and the 2600 controller was just that. Nevertheless, this thing is just a no-go nowadays. This stick needs to go see a doctor, it's just too stiff. And the overall size of the controller is a problem, for me at least. It's too small to comfortably hold the joystick with one hand and the rest of the controller with the other, and it's too big to comfortably hold it like a modern controller. Overall though, I'd say the 2600 controller was alright for what it was. It's completely usable by anybody, just nothing you jump at the chance to use. After the 2600, controllers went through this ugly phase for a while, and it was all because a controller designer went home for the weekend, looked at his phone and said, "I'm drunk." Why? Yeah, the Intellivision, ColecoVision, even Atari themselves with the Atari 5200 all followed the hot trend of putting a number pad on the controller. Let me ask you this, in what dimension do games this simple need more than 9 buttons? Many games came with overlays to put on the controller so you know what each button does, but that just kind of forces you to constantly look at the controller to know what to press with or without the overlays. In my opinion, that's when a controller fails, when you have to look away from the game to figure out what the hell you're supposed to press. Well, after all that flopped, we then make our way to the Nintendo Entertainment System, a true innovation for controllers, breaking away from the joystick to form something that was more compact and easier to hold. The Vectrex in 1982 had a similar form factor for its controller, but the NES introduced something huge. Now I know, first thing many people probably said when they saw this cross on the controller was, "Pump the brakes, Speed Racer, nobody puts religion in my dig dug." But this cross design called the D-pad made the controller way more comfortable to use with just your thumb. Nintendo used the D-pad beforehand on one of their Game & Watch handhelds, and precursors to it appeared elsewhere, but the NES shot the D-pad into the mainstream, and with that, the joystick was old news. Many consider this guy to have aged poorly, and while I do somewhat agree, I think it's still alright to use. My main problem is the D-pad itself is a bit uncomfortable after long play sessions. But I love the feel of the buttons, just so clicky and satisfying to just go to town on. This is where the term button mashing was born. I see a lot of people say the sharp corners really dig into their hands, but I've never personally had an issue with them. However, the sharpness was criticized even back in the day, so Nintendo responded with some alternatives. The NES Advantage is the controller you never let your daughter go to prom with. This thing is a hulking beast that's powered by 2 whole controller ports. You can flip a switch to alternate between player 1 and 2 for games like Super Mario Bros. Where you alternate turns. There's turbo buttons with knobs which allow you to have rapid fire on A and B, and don't forget the state-of-the-art slow motion feature, which was just simply the game constantly pausing and unpausing itself. That meant for games that featured anything on the screen when paused, they just looked off. Regardless, the NES Advantage is a beaut of a controller. I think this thing is really slick. It just feels so sturdy, and there's something so satisfying about pressing these huge buttons. But what if you're not into overcompensating? Well, the NES Max may be for you, featuring a new grippable design, the turbo buttons of the Advantage alongside something called the Cycloid, a bit of a precursor to the 3DS Circle Pad. It's much easier to grip thanks to these new thighs, but the Cycloid really isn't a replacement for the D-pad in my opinion. Now, with the introduction of the NES Top Loader, Nintendo redesigned the standard NES controller, nicknamed the Dogbone. This thing was so close to being the perfect NES controller. The rounded edges, the nicer feeling D-pad, but they just had to angle the A and B buttons so only a lobster could hold it correctly. It just doesn't feel right. Nobody's hand normally rests like this on a controller. It's just uncomfortable. Well, since the original NES controller worked, many simply tried to copy it. The Sega Master System and TurboGrafx 16 controllers, while different in some ways, were basically just their version of the NES controller. Atari decided to barge into the party with their 7800 controller, and I'm pretty sure everybody stared at them until they released this instead. Only in Europe, though. In the US, we were treated to this, and over there they got this. Lucky them. Of course, Sega had to do something different with the Sega Master System's follow-up, so they brought out this 3-buttoned hunk. Anybody else ever realize just how big the Sega Genesis controller really is? Like, whoa. This guy has some meat on its bones, but weirdly enough, it only has the same amount of buttons as the NES controller. Like, it doesn't have a select button, so even though it has 3 face buttons, they both have 4 in total. That led to problems down the line when fighting games were coming over, which required more buttons, so Sega crammed some more in with the introduction of the 6-button controllers. Shove your hand between the couch cushions and you'll find various Sega Genesis controllers, each different from the last. Like, Sega released so many Genesis controller variants, it's crazy. They're all different in terms of design, button placement, D-pads, it's ridiculous. I interrupt your regularly scheduled me with an emergency report by me. Controllers made by other companies, not the console manufacturers themselves, are running rampant, and most are up to no good. This is the third-party controller watch list. Our mission statement is to bring more awareness to Here we have the Tag 50 joystick for your local Sega Genesis system. It falls in line with the rest of the, I guess if that's what you want sort of thing, controllers. It's not bad, but it doesn't necessarily work well with the vast majority of the Sega Genesis library. It does have these suction cups on its base, which makes it harder to move around on a coffee table, and it also looks pretty good on a windshield. The 6-button controllers are fine and good, but the 3-button one is the classic, the one my mind immediately shoots to when Genesis is on the mind, and it's a solid controller in its own right. It may be a bit bulky, but it feels good. However, it was completely outdone by the makers of Chibi Robo Ziplash.
Bam, 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 bam. Hello and welcome to...
Obviously, no. No.
Whose child is this?
No, obviously, no.
Oh my lord.
The esports updates.
No! This is why they don't let pseudo-Europeans who lived in China who come from Portland drive.
What's the recipe for surprising the kids, treating yourself, and ditching dish duty? You're looking at it. Order your Pizza Hut faves like original pan, original stuffed crust, and more at pizzahut.com. No one out-pizzas the Hut.
New Spicy Lovers Pizza from Pizza Hut. Hurts so good. With this spicy marinara sauce and sliced red chilies, it's like a roundhouse kick to the taste buds. Now don't be bashful with the fiery flakes. The new Spicy Lovers Pizza. Get it before it's gone. No one out-pizzas the Hut.
The SNES controller is magnificent. It may not be my favorite of all time, but it does so much so right. The buttons are lined up in this beautiful way where it's so comfortable to use your thumb to press the Y button with the rest of it resting on B, ready to use at a moment's notice. Excellent for games like Super Mario World or Mega Man X. Shoulder buttons came swinging in, L and R, with all buttons in the D-pad feeling exquisite. Couple that with the rounded shape, and this is something that dreams are made of. Atari, just go home. The Atari Jaguar brought back the classic number pad. I'm sure they looked at Sega combating Nintendo by adding more buttons to their controller and shrieked, "Yep, that's the next big craze, more than 12 buttons, the kids will love us." Next up, the original PlayStation came to be due to a failed partnership between Sony and Nintendo, which would focus on a CD add-on for the SNES. After that bust, Sony created their own console based on their knowledge from working with Nintendo, which is pretty obvious looking at the controller. I sometimes forget how similar the PlayStation and SNES controllers are. I mean, fundamentally, the only main differences are the D-pad, 2 sets of shoulder buttons, and thighs. That's it. However, the PlayStation controller finally became a man with the DualShock. Look at the size of these things. This redesign features meteor triggers, a rumble feature, and dual analog sticks. The rumble and analog were obviously responses to the Nintendo 64's controller, which came before it, and we'll get to that in due time. But the DualShock made dual sticks a standard. It also introduced clicking down on the sticks as an additional button input, which, can I say something here? R1, L1, R2, L2. These are shoulder buttons. It makes sense they're numbered like this. Why are these called R3 and L3? Anyways, I love the feel of the analog sticks. They're so smooth and the texture works so well. But what if the DualShock just isn't doing anything for you, and you hate happiness? Here's the Nintendo 64 controller. This came out after the original PlayStation controller and before the DualShock, and man, we can bark about this controller all we want, but gotta admit, this thing was innovative in so many ways. Controlling a game in 3D with the analog control stick, camera control, 4-player multiplayer being standard on the console, even the trigger on the back, give your finger a cock and BAM! This was a huge leap forward for the industry, yes, but answer me this. Just what the hell is this thing? 3 prongs make it so you have multiple ways to play multiple games. Maybe you can hold it like this, or even this. But that means not all the buttons are readily available to the player in any of the controller holding styles. Also, the stick is garbage. This thing is just a skinny, plastic, uncomfortable piece of work that wears out too easily. Now, the Nintendo 64 controller did a lot right. It introduced Rumble with the Rumble Pack accessory. The analog stick brought us games like Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time. And look at these colors. This thing is a colorblind Scott Wozniak's worst nightmare.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Moving on, the Sega Saturn controller was pretty decent. Basically just an evolution of the Genesis 6-button ones with shoulder buttons this time around. But Sega also introduced the 3D control pad for a few games, specifically Nights into Dreams. And this controller leads us into its immediate successor on Sega's last home console, the Sega Dreamcast controller.
Yep, I don't like this controller.
Now, is this controller as bad as the Nintendo 64's? God, no. It actually has a layout that makes sense. But this stick is just not comfortable. This was still when many companies didn't realize that hard plastic on an analog stick isn't mankind's favorite thing out there. Also, why does the wire come out of the bottom? There's a groove for you to pop the cord in near the top, so that way it's pointing in the right direction, which just kind of comes off as a slight fix to a design oversight. At least the triggers were analog, which was a solid innovation. It definitely made racing games more realistic. But who could forget the VMU, the memory card with a screen displaying info or housing its own games to be played? But that, PlayStation's back, baby, with the PlayStation 2's all-new DualShock 2. This is the same controller, except the face buttons are now analog, which is dumb. Why do you need the triangle button to be pressure sensitive? Why? It felt like they just assumed analog inputs were the next big thing, but you don't need it for everything. Well, moving past that, we have the introduction of the Xbox brand, and with it, holy well, I can tell you first off, that was the easiest Easter egg hunt I've ever been a part of. This controller does get a number of things right. Number 1, giant Xbox logo. The Duke, as it's referred to now, is a behemoth. It's big for the sake of being big. There's no reason for it to be this way. Now it's completely usable, but it's just not that great when you get down to it. Like, what is this? Seriously. Also, the dual sticks just feel weird. Like, the left one has a large concave area, and the right one has a much smaller area, which honestly feels like it's convex. God, I need a shower. Microsoft designed a smaller controller for the Japanese market that made its way over to the States later down the line, and this is much more reasonable. I can actually get behind this one. It just feels much better. Everything actually makes sense this time. After Nintendo wouldn't stop laughing for 5 years straight, they really cleaned up their act with the GameCube controller. This thing is pure comfort. It just feels right in the hands. The button layout is definitely different compared to every other controller, and while I prefer the more traditional design, this layout makes a lot of sense. The main face button you'd probably use in most games is A, so why not have everything orbit around it? The triggers are crazy satisfying to click down, and the left stick is leagues better than the Nintendo 64 one. I love this controller, but while it's one of my favorites, it does have some gross parts. The D-pad and C-stick were made for ants, and the lack of another shoulder button is a bit odd. Regardless, the GameCube controller has definitely stood the test of time. These pesky wires, man, what is this, the year 2000? That's where the Wavebird comes in, a wireless variant of the controller. It uses radio frequency to transmit the wireless signal. Wireless controllers were around for a while, but most used IR, like a TV remote. You had to keep them pointed to the adapter for them to function properly. But all you had to do with the Wavebird was match up the dials on the controller and the adapter, and you're all set. While it wasn't the first wireless controller, I'd argue it's the first truly great one. You can go all around the room with it, and it works perfectly. The only main downside compared to going wired is that it doesn't include rumble and it takes batteries.
Was the GameCube C-stick not small enough for you? Well, do I have a bad controller for you? Introducing the GameStop branded wireless GameCube controller. Too small and uncomfortable for any of you with hands out there. The analog stick keeps with the tried and true tradition of hard plastic to make sure you hate it even more, and the buttons reek of loud plastic cheap. Also, it's been reported that if you do touch a controller like this, you will most definitely contract bed bugs, damn it.
Wireless was truly the next step for controllers. We make our way to the Xbox 360, which has one of the most acclaimed controllers of all time. I mean, there was nowhere to go but up after this thing, but everything is just so finely tuned and makes for a perfectly balanced controller. Minus the D-pad. Microsoft later released 360 controllers with this transforming D-pad where you can have it like a traditional one or go back to this garbage. Personally, I have no clue why you'd want anything other than the more traditional D-pad, but I don't care, this thing is fun to twiddle with. Next up, the PS3 controller. Jesus Christ, guys, it's been over 10 years at this point and you still haven't moved on? To be fair, Sony was set to go with an all-new design for the PS3 standard controller. I've never been so happy to see this design come back. The 6-axis controller was there for the first few years of the PlayStation 3's life and was basically the DualShock again, but now wireless with motion control capabilities and no rumble. Sony later released a traditional DualShock 3, rumble and motion controls included. Now everything was going pretty smoothly with controllers at this point. The 360 really hit it out of the park, the PS3 was going with a time-tested design, and Nintendo... Yeah, the PS3 controller may have had some motion controls, but the Wii Remote full out embraced them. There are definitely things I love and hate about this controller. When it works, it really works. When it doesn't work, it really doesn't work. We only have a D-pad on the remote with a few buttons on the front and a trigger on the back. It may seem limiting, but the controller was smartly designed to be usable in a multitude of ways. Like a TV remote, on its side like an old school NES controller, with the nunchuck attachment that actually gives you a stick, or inside a countless supply of plastic. I really admire how creative they got with uses for the Wii Remote, but I'm not gonna lie and say this thing is a great controller. The sideways control method isn't my favorite. I'm just not a huge fan of this D-pad or these buttons. And like I said, the motion controls are definitely hit and miss. However, Nintendo did release the Wii Motion Plus add-on and the Wii Remote Plus to enhance the motion capabilities, and I gotta say with these, I'd say the Wii Remote is pretty alright. Motion is pretty accurate now, and when used properly, it can be a really fun controller. But if you're more into the traditional side of things, might I suggest the Wii Classic controllers. They plug into the bottom just like the nunchuck, and man, I forgot how decent these things really were. The original is quite derivative of a Super Nintendo controller, but includes some modern additions like two sticks that are way too close together, and buttons I like to refer to as, you call these triggers? There's also this mystery button on the top, which, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think this was ever used and still don't know what use it was ever going to have. The original Classic controller was great for retro games, but a bit lackluster for more modern ones, so let's flip that around. Here's the Classic Controller Pro. It's much more akin to the PlayStation 2 controller and is great for some of the more hardcore Wii games out there. Nintendo then put the Wii Remote in Photoshop, gave it a little of this, a little of that, popped a screen in the middle, and blam, Wii U gamepad. It gets a bad rap. It's huge, unnecessary, and clunky. Listen, I'm with you on a lot of that, however, I found this controller to be wildly comfortable to use. The grips are nice and all the buttons and sticks are large and feel great. The problem is, this guy. The screen isn't the worst, but certainly not the best. And its use in some games was just annoying, and it led to one of the worst battery lives out there. The gamepad doesn't hold a charge well at all, so if you charge it up and don't use it for a week, chances are when you pick it back up, it's gonna be dead-zo. Also, you have to charge it via a separate power adapter, not the Wii U itself. And just so much garbage was thrown into this thing, I'm pretty sure you could survive in the wilderness for a week with just this. A camera, NFC, TV remote, knock it off. Almost none of that is needed. Except I will say the TV remote was pretty useful. Like with the Wii remote, if you're not into all of this, Nintendo offered a Pro Controller, and get ready Wii U Pro Controller Defense Force, I don't like this controller. It all has to do with the fact that the buttons are on the bottom. It's just so annoying and stupid. This format worked on the gamepad because it was so big. The buttons were placed in a perfectly usable location, but here, it just doesn't work for me. Also, the triggers feel weird, man. I think it's because they aren't analog, yet they're designed just like the 360s. Which are. The Wii U gamepads were these fat patios for you to click and they felt good. These, not so much. At least this controller lasts up to 80 hours on a single charge, which is something the gamepad definitely can't say. However, both got on my bad side for having this gross glossy finish. Like, this looks good in pictures and for 2 seconds after you open the package. Anytime afterwards, welcome to Fingerprint Avenue.
Now I don't own this thing anymore due to unforeseen circumstances.
If I could sue a game controller, I would first go after whatever the hell this third-party Wii U controller is, and then sue the Wii remote for deception.
But I do remember everything about it and how it was the definition of everything a falsely advertised product was. This controller was trying to scam people into thinking it was a Wii U Pro controller. However, it turns out it was fundamentally just a Wii remote and Wii Classic controller all in one. Now, the idea of having a standard controller with the capabilities of a Wii remote and Classic controller all in one is great. The problem was this controller was terrible at everything it did. The build quality was cheapo, the buttons felt like mashed potatoes. The only reason why anybody gave this controller any attention was the fact that there was a Super Nintendo and Super Famicom color scheme available.
Ladies and gentlemen, everybody watching at home from around the world.
Yes, I'm here in Cologne for the finals of Intel Extreme.
Hello and welcome to another episode of G4's Crash Course.
He's the first cleanly has. Nexus is next. GG, they can't let it slip. Oh no. They're letting it slip. Okay, Hunter and Nico will collect.
First thing I'm gonna get you to do, sort the negative attitude out.
You're a strong man, okay? You're strong.
Turn the frown upside down.
Rowan, we're gonna die! We're gonna die, Rowan!
Good luck, adventurer!
The PS4 controller actually switched some things up compared to the PlayStation controllers of the past. They went for a new, more ergonomic design, and I think it worked out pretty well. There's this touch bar now, which I personally haven't found all too useful, a light bar, which just feels like an excuse for this controller to have battery life, and whoa, where did the start and select buttons go? Yeah, the PS4 was the start of something dreadful. The death of start and select. Instead, we got this share button, which is useful enough, I guess, sharing photos and videos of gameplay. But what the hell is this options garbage? Well, whatever. I do have to say that while the DualShock 4 is comfortable and a decent controller overall, There are a few problems with the build quality. I don't know, it's just the one controller I consistently have problems with, and I'm not alone with that. The Xbox One controller feels a bit like more of the same from the 360 controller, but with random tweaks and changes that feel both better and worse. Like, it feels more premium in some cases, but cheaper in others. It's a bit more compact and trying to look more modern than the 360s. I think the D-pad is better and the sticks have a more grippy surface to them. But I don't know, there's something a bit off about this design. Not bad by any means, but I think I still prefer the 360s. Also, am I the only one that thinks the replacements for Start and Select make no sense? What the hell is 2 boxes and 3 lines? That finally brings us to the Nintendo Switch's supply of controllers, the Joy-Con, the controllers that come packed in with the console. The Switch is an interesting situation. It had to have controllers that have to be on the console itself to enable handheld play, but be detachable to make use of a variety of different playstyles. God, these things are too small. Listen, I adore so much about the Joy-Con, but they're basically taking everything in modern controllers and cramming them into something you'd find in a dollhouse. I mean, these things have a lot going on in them, a full suite of buttons and sticks, new HD rumble, motion controls, NFC. They're perfectly usable, just not that great. I love the idea of how they were designed to be used as 2 separate controllers, but is this a way to live? The shoulder buttons for the individual Joy-Con are miserable, so much so that Nintendo supplies straps to slide on for better ones. Using them together is alright, however they're still more akin to the Nintendo 3DS controls compared to most home console controllers. For me personally, I go for the Switch Pro controller. This thing is truly no nonsense, it gets right to the point. It uses a button and stick layout that makes me swoon, the texture of it all feels great, nice big meaty buttons, a solid battery life, all the technology from the Joy-Con. This is what you call a controller. I always keep the Joy-Con attached to the Switch for when I want to play portably, and keep the Pro controller on standby for home console use. And that is a basic history and review of most of the major video game controllers. We've gone through a lot, and while not all of it has been great, it's all led to where we are now. The inception of motion controls, the pause button, the introduction of analog control with the 1292 Advanced Programmable Video System.
Jesus.
Experience with number pads, trackballs, screens, these successes and failures helped us form some of the greatest game controllers out there. Don't immediately bat away new features and gimmicks introduced in controllers because they may be huge steps in the right direction for the industry. They may not be talked about as much as the games or consoles themselves, but they are some of the most important aspects of the video game industry.
Well, let me know what your favorite or least favorite game controllers are, and if you'd excuse me, I have another, for real this time, meeting about video game related issues. This time on video game box art. You gotta be kidding me. Hey y'all, Scott here. Please, for the love of God, don't mind me. I'm just doing some touch-ups to my high school yearbook photo. You think they'd let me do retakes 9 years later? There's gotta be a grace period. I've been having trouble going to sleep thinking about what people thought of me back then, so hopefully this will change their minds. Okay, and we're done! I actually toned it down, I didn't want to get too late.
Telling the truth. What are you, a bitch? Well, be honest about how your video game looks when you can just lie and deal with it when it's already bought. False advertising is how many companies roll. We've all seen those fast food comparison shots. This is what's advertised, and this is what I got.
What the hell?
Most of the time for marketing, they'll use something that represents the final product, but you do some color correction, adjust the lighting, tweak a few angles here and there, boom, good enough for air. And when it comes to video games, they are no stranger to catfishing. Why show actual gameplay in your ad when you can show something that's neither a game nor being played? It's way easier to disappoint players than to entice them with the truth.
No matter what, false advertising is always gonna stick with gaming. It's been there since the very start and it'll be there till the very end in 4 months. Advertisers know they could just show you what the actual game is gonna be like, or they could visualize what it'll feel like. Garbage.
Sometimes advertisements don't necessarily lie, but with the way they're set up, you come in with certain expectations. With the Mario Galaxy commercials and box art, I thought you could fly through space just like this to each of the galaxies. Instead, they just play a cutscene of Mario flying, and when you would fly in game, it would mostly just be an automated thing going from one place to another. You did get a power-up late in the game, the Red Star, and that let you freely fly for a decent amount of time, but it was only in one level and the hub world. I wanted to cream through space to all these levels like how this looked. And Super Mario Galaxy just ended up being my favorite game of all time. I'll take the single tier. This is kind of the mentality of a lot of old school box art. Box art in general is supposed to be an artistic representation of the game you're buying. Of course it shouldn't lie, but if you're waiting for an exact moment in the game to look just like the box art, Oh, that's a toughie. I don't think this ever happened in Title Legends. Obviously, these take and hyperbolize the best and most defining moments of the game to make for a great and appealing piece of art that also isn't misleading, which is a difficult thing to balance. Atari thought we were idiots. This isn't misleading because under the right mindset, the game will make you feel like this.
So eating soap.
You thought we were past this level of deception? Oh, no. See, many have noticed how box art has become more in line with what we expect out of our games these days, but the angst behind the Atari box art lives on in the form of trailers. We could show the product and get people excited, or we could not show the product and get people excited and pissed eventually. Hey, sometimes you just have to show something. And if that something isn't enough, America's biggest fear becomes a reality. The gamers will revolt. So it's obviously enticing to make your game look as appealing as possible in your big reveal trailer. It's okay to use a few scenes not actually in the game. Maybe put some CGI there for the sake of cinema. Maybe put that in. It's not in the game, but we can make it happen in the game, right? This is how legends are born. Dead Island is one of my go-to picks for deceiving trailers, and it's one of the best ones of all time. This incredible, emotional, 3-minute long cinematic masterpiece showing a family being attacked and losing their lives to a zombie outbreak, all played in reverse. There's so much you can analyze with this trailer. It put Dead Island on the map for so many players. This trailer was the first time I had even heard of the game. It really set the title up to be a gripping, emotional story of a zombie apocalypse and the emotional turmoil that ensues because of it. Here's the first thing you see putting the disc in.
Shrunken head, broken legs, body parts on the concrete.
Not saying Dead Island is a bad game at all, but the trailer and the game are two completely different beasts. The tone in the game is still fairly serious, but not as serious or emotionally gripping as the trailer would lead you to believe. These characters have nothing to do with the game other than showing remnants of the outbreak as it first occurred on the island. The developer Techland even went into the game after the trailer came out to try to adjust the tone as much as possible to be more in line with it. But these still feel like two different things. It just shows how powerful marketing can be, making it what something you had no prior interest in. But this was a case of false advertising just because we let somebody talented make our trailer. Oops. Sometimes false advertising is very much deliberate as it sets you up for a massive shock while playing the game. Metal Gear Solid 2 is a prime example, as you think you'll just play as Snake the whole game. Nah, you're playing the rest of the game as his new character, Raiden. Final Fantasy VII Remake. Well, with the title literally involving the word remake, it sets you up to expect the story to basically follow the same steps as the original, also the entirety of the original. In reality, this was a lie. The Last of Us Part 2, on top of pulling the same Metal Gear Solid joke of, you thought you were playing as this character? Laugh. They also altered certain cutscenes for its trailers to make the character Joel look older in them, so that way, with viewers knowing he's aged, they were led to believe he was in more of the game than he really was, when in reality, they altered flashback scenes, made him look older, and put them in the trailer.
See, I don't really consider that to be false advertising, at least in the more negative sense. Rather, it's leading players in another direction, or just not showing things to avoid spoilers. So it's just being an ass.
But then we have just the flat out lies. Some of the most despicable, loathsome moments in the video game industry. The Simpsons game. This game had the audacity to say in its E3 2007 trailer it was releasing on every platform ever made.
Coming this fall to every platform ever made.
Wow, even the PSP? See, most people would assume that's a joke, but you forget to take into consideration most people. Some people genuinely thought this game was coming to all these platforms, so we had to re-release the trailer. The voiceover was the same, but the platforms showcased were... true. Well, I said it was ridiculous for anybody to assume the original trailer wasn't a joke. I think some of the platform choices were incredibly misleading. The Game Boy Advance and GameCube were still being supported at this time, so out of all platforms to put there as a joke, those are really odd choices considering I don't think it was too far-fetched to expect a Game Boy Advance or GameCube version in 2007. Or the VIC-20.
Our story began in Waterdeep, the city of splendors, with a group of scoundrels.
You'll be completely safe with me.
I really do love you, but that was absolutely disgusting.
A spider the size of a horse.
I shouldn't have picked these bowls.
In battle with a black dragon wormlet.
You guys are happy.
What's the recipe for surprising the kids, treating yourself, and ditching dish duty? You're looking at it. Order your Pizza Hut faves like original pan, original stuffed crust, and more at pizzahut.com. No one out-pizzas the Hut.
On Sci-Fi's Resident Alien,
I'm here to kill everyone.
The only thing stranger than an alien pretending to be human
I'm a superior being!
are humans being humans.
What you think, I got Willy Wonka tattooed on my ass like it's a chocolate factory? I think you should spend more time with some other people in town.
I miss your butt, Asta.
I have met all the other people in town.
Serve my blue pound cake.
Hello, pretty lady.
They are annoying flesh monkeys.
Don't miss all new episodes of Sci-Fi's Resident Alien, Wednesdays at 9.
New Spicy Lovers Pizza from Pizza Hut. Hurts so good. With this spicy marinara sauce and sliced red chilies, it's like a roundhouse kick to the taste buds. Now don't be bashful with the fiery flakes. The new Spicy Lovers Pizza. Get it before it's gone. No one out-pizzas the Hut.
I didn't realize there would be actual applause.
Yes!
Life-changing.
That's all you do in this game.
Graphics and what have you. Marvel Spider-Man by Insomniac Games gets a 5 out of 5.
So I have a question.
Am I considered a classic?
Zelda! Oh.
The box itself can be pretty deceitful sometimes. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild on Wii U says it supports the Wii Remote and Nunchuck and Classic Controller and lying. This was just a misprint, but there was speculation in the early days of Breath of the Wild's development that it would allow players to use motion controls like with Skyward Sword on the Wii. Now, supporting one Wii Remote by itself, I think only the bravest speculated that. Doom on Sega Saturn says on the box that it's the original Doom in all of its glory when it's missing content. But then we have the flat-out disappointments. Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. Oh, this collector's edition comes with stones.
I swear to God if they're just eggs.
Not again. These have all been somewhat tolerable lies, though. I mean, if she's cheating on you, at least she's only doing it a little. Aliens Colonial Marines was such a massive cluster of garbage. Like, what the hell happened here? Gameplay demos shown were severely different from the final product, making the game look so much more sophisticated with good lighting, AI, animations, a severe attention to detail. But upon release, we only have a few options here. See, this was a massive downgrade, some areas of the game more so than others, but in the end, this was pure deceptive marketing. At E3 2012, the game was running on very specific work machines. This wasn't gonna work on the consoles at the time, but they made it still not work. While it's not unplayable, Colonial Marines was a huge disappointment and showcases how companies will pretty up a game for major gameplay demos to end up releasing something not nearly as groundbreaking. The intention definitely wasn't to win everybody over at E3 and then release. These gameplay demos are supposed to represent what they want the game to be, and if it actually turns out that way, well, let's pray God's a fan. I mean, this demo looks like a fine-tuned PS4 Xbox One game, not a 360 title. It tricked millions into buying the game, thinking it would be this, when in reality, it was nothing but a shell of that. Watch Dogs suffered a similar, though not a severe fate, where it too looked light years better via the gameplay demo than in its final state. This was definitely because it was revealed quite early in the project's life. They didn't have to take hardware limitations into account nearly as much at this time compared to when you're finalizing everything about the game. And when it got to that point, I mean, the game still looks fine, but that E3 gameplay demo was beyond impressive. Watch Dogs at release was a somewhat buggy, generic, modern Ubisoft game, and not much more than that. No Man's Sky was a huge letdown for many, with the promise of basically having an infinite amount of worlds to travel to in space. Of course, the ones they decided to showcase at E3 were the only ones of note. The game was supposed to feature procedurally generated worlds, and when you would land on one, it was truly you discovering it, but in reality, the game launched as a boring experience where there was nothing to do, and the worlds weren't impressive. They didn't look as graphically decent as they did during the marketing push, and they all just felt like variations of each other, nothing of note. Now, Watch Dogs wasn't the biggest downgrade. It was still a decent game, and No Man's Sky got a ton of updates, and at this point, it's pretty okay and does a better job living up to what was initially promised. Aliens was one of the worst cases of this, deliberately making a better looking gameplay demo before releasing. Gameplay demos are supposed to be more trustworthy than trailers. That's the point of them. The trailers use CG cutscenes and cuts between them and gameplay all the time. The gameplay demo is supposed to show you what you're gonna get. because trailers can be incredibly misleading. The Killzone 2 trailer infamously was all CGI, even though it was animated in a way to make the viewers think it was all gameplay. See, this was right before the PlayStation 3 was coming out, and that was a time when we thought anything was possible on these consoles. If anybody could resurrect Christ, it would be the PS3. So many assumed they weren't lying. This was gameplay. Now, Killzone 2 still looked quite good when it released, but the people who made this trailer, they're still going to hell. Tiger Woods PGA Tour 2009 on Wii. The commercial used Xbox 360 footage of the game with a Wii Remote pointer. How did they think that would fly? EA explained the Wii footage wouldn't look good on a TV, so they used the HD footage from the 360 version and put the Wii Remote pointer in there, and bam, that's a sin. But one game decided to do something innovative. Be the biggest example of false advertising of all time. Yeah, I'm not really saying anything that hasn't already been said here. Smallpox. They stink. But when talking about false advertising in gaming, we can't avoid the piss stain on my Xbox collection. Cyberpunk 2077 was developed by CD Projekt Red, a developer highly regarded for their work on the Witcher series and their commitment to consumer-friendly practices. I mean, The Witcher 3 was a huge hit, but even before that release, they announced they'd be working on a game based on the Cyberpunk series of tabletop RPGs. This was in 1964. Announced in 2012, then getting its first trailer in 2013, and then its next trailer 5 years later. In reality, the game was nowhere near starting full-on development, and it took until The Witcher 3's final expansion released in 2016 for the team to actually start work, and when this gameplay demo was fully revealed in 2018, jaws were dropped. This was such a detailed world with people walking around who have legitimate lives to live. If you would follow just one around, you would see them go about their day, go to their job, go home, and every single decision of yours would come back to bite you in the ass. And this is all without saying the game looked stunning. Just absolutely beautiful models and settings. The animations were amazing. It looked like the most advanced video game of all time. And guess what? After being delayed numerous times, Cyberpunk launched in a state that, well, the main issue stemmed from the console versions. The PC version looked, ran, and worked the best, but it still was a far cry from that initial gameplay reveal. Most of the issues boiled down to how glitchy and unpolished the game could be at times, but at its core, I'll stand by the fact it's a good game. The world is really what sells it. It's so detailed and feels like a genuine lived-in place, and being in a dystopian future, it's truly a world worth exploring and looking at every little minute thing. But everything around it just doesn't feel all too special. The gameplay isn't anything groundbreaking. It's a first-person open-world RPG involving shooting and driving segments, and none of this is bad, but it just isn't anything I haven't seen before. Anything that they talked about in the gameplay demo, like how advanced the non-playable characters are, you just see them walking in a circle, going up to them and hitting the talk button, and they say one of like 3 repeated phrases to you. The same goes for the characters more integral to the story. They'll repeat some voice lines, which is fine, that's understandable, but this isn't the genre-defining game they made it out to be. It's a brilliantly designed world inside a game that feels like it's from 2013. Glitches were abundant, and we're just talking about the PC version here. On Xbox One and PlayStation 4, not only were glitches even more all over the place, but the game ran like piss, and that doesn't run well. Choppy frame rates, low resolution, the game would freeze and crash constantly, and this was the product of a giant marketing campaign pushed by investors and higher-ups who didn't understand how game development worked. They wanted a 2020 release date, which by the time CD Projekt Red started development would have given them less time to finish than The Witcher 3. And this project was so much more advanced with elements they've never worked with before. It just felt like a lot of choices they made didn't add up. Like, why do we have all this customization for our character, but the game is almost exclusively played in the first person and you barely ever see your character? Why push all this money into marketing and showing a demo of a game that frankly didn't exist yet? Much like other examples given, this demo was basically what the developers were told to shoot for, not what the game was, and no matter how much the developers said they needed more time or this wasn't possible, the marketing pushed Cyberpunk that much more. Like, did they really have to announce, hey, the game is finished, when the developer said, bullshit it is? Cyberpunk 2077 is a good game. It may not be for everybody, but to act like at its core this isn't a well-crafted experience, I think is a bit much. But you can't blame people for thinking that after such a disastrous launch and being lied to constantly. This was a case of a developer who was known for their goodwill and how players adored them, and higher-ups taking advantage of that. It's crazy to me how much these companies feel the need to lie when they know that it'll just come back to bite them in the ass. They take first impressions more seriously than launch impressions sometimes, but is it really worth all the headaches? To go through lawsuits and refunds and to lose consumer trust, all to impress people at E3 with something you know damn well can't be accomplished? Well, for some people it is. That's why lying is so popular. Fix a problem now, deal with the repercussions later, instead of telling the truth and causing some potential disappointment, but then you don't have to deal with bigger problems a year from now. It's just sometimes marketing takes over projects, and a lot of marketers don't care. Their job is to get people interested, and even if it turns out to be over lies, well, that's more publicity for the project. I guarantee you, more people have talked about Cyberpunk and Aliens Colonial Marines and No Man's Sky because they were disasters compared to if they were as good as they were made out to be. And if regardless of if discussion is positive or negative, it's still getting the name out there, which means false advertising for games will never go away. Game studios are constantly pressured into pushing boundaries, and I feel like they look at what they're currently capable of, no matter how advanced, and think it's not good enough. So they pretty things up for reveals and just assume they'll get it working later. But as we can see, that's not the greatest risk to take. I think the lesson to be learned here is it's okay to be excited. It's also okay to be skeptical, but maybe wait to make a full decision until something's out in the world and actual people are playing the game rather than snake people. Because liars are everywhere. They might even be staring you in the face. And this was when I lost credibility.
Hello, adventurer! I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw you from afar.
Would you rather have eternal happiness for the rest of your life or die?
I have a question.
Am I considered a classic?
5 out of 5.
Graphics and what have you.
That's all you do in this game!
Oh.
This is why they don't let pseudo-Europeans who lived in China who come from Portland drive!
Hey all, Scott here. I hate walls. Why do I live here? Have you ever realized there's a reason for these things to exist? That's right, you haven't, because there isn't any. But for some reason, the wall companies have a monopoly on console video games. It's just the reality we live in now, the way God intended. Super Nintendo cartridges must be played indoors. Yeah, that's right, God. You know what was the coolest thing ever? Playing a game in an environment you couldn't normally play that game in. This is incredible! I'm talking taking games you can only play on the TV from a home console that only worked when plugged into an electrical socket and making them playable on the go. See, I loved my Game Boy Advance, but whenever I'd pick up a game for the handheld that also released for the GameCube, for some reason, I would think, oh my god, it'll be just like playing the GameCube game on the go! Oh, this is rich. In reality, it was almost always a completely different game. Portable consoles just couldn't keep up with the homegrown stuff. To be fair, a lot of home console games would eventually make it to handhelds, but they would generally be pretty old by the time they did. But that didn't stop me from wanting Super Mario Galaxy and Smash Bros. Brawl playable on my Nintendo DS. I mean, they put Super Mario 64 on the system to take the game that defined what 3D gaming would be, the game that may quite possibly be the biggest leap forward in gaming history, and make it portable. it's still a spectacle to behold. Taking things that always required to be plugged in at all times to be stationary in your home and giving you the option to take them on the go, that will always be a magical feeling. And while many games that appeared on home consoles eventually made their way to handhelds, No. I want to play the Super Nintendo version of this game, not the Game Boy Advance version of the Super Nintendo version. Look at this, it's kinda different. I don't want a portable device capable of playing versions of Super Nintendo games. I want a portable Super Nintendo. The idea of taking a home console and cramming it into something the size of a Game Boy has been around for quite a while. Sure, you could just buy the Game Boy version of that NES game, but wouldn't you rather play the NES game on the go? That was the mentality behind some of the first major home consoles to go, the Turbo Express and Sega Nomad. And with these, we can finally stay outside forever and still play console games, no looking back! The Turbo Express was a portable TurboGrafx 16. You could play the exact same game cards, though you couldn't play the games released for the console CD add-on. Now I don't own a Turbo Express because I spent all my money on not this, but I do have a Sega Nomad. Could you tell? Yeah, this is the size of a concerning growth. It's definitely not the slimmest portable out there, but come on, considering it was released in 1995 and is a full-blown portable Sega Genesis, I think it's fairly understandable how big it is. Hell, a Sega Genesis cartridge alone is the size of a Game Boy Pocket. Of course this system's gonna be bulky. So to play this on the go, we're gonna need a battery pack. Damn it. Alright, I'll go inside just this once to try this thing out. After that, never again. I have to plug it into a power outlet, which at that point you may ask, what's the point of playing Genesis games on this when I could just play them on a TV? It doesn't matter, because look, I'm playing Sonic 1, but it stinks now! Playing with the battery pack would require 6 AA batteries, and they'd be drained in around 2 to 3 hours. That, or there was a rechargeable option, but overall, not the greatest battery life, and installing a battery pack would make this thing nearly impossible to shove into a pocket. Not being able to put a Sega Nomad in my pocket is my worst nightmare. But in practice, honestly, the Nomad is far better than I ever expected it to be. It plays Sega Genesis games. It is an official Sega Genesis after all. The screen was always what I heard the most horror stories about, how it didn't age that well. And yeah, I think the biggest problem is how blurry it can get, but it's way better than many made it out to be. It's still fairly playable. And now games like Sonic, it may be a bit fast for, it gets a bit too blurry, but something like Streets of Rage works fairly well. You can adjust the brightness, which helps a ton, and you can even output the Nomad to a TV as well as connect another controller. This truly is a Sega Genesis on the go. You just can't attach any of the add-ons like the Sega CD or Sega 32X. I mean, who cares? What, was I really gonna play Fahrenheit on the go? Yeah, the Nomad's pretty impressive all things considered. I mean, say what you will about the battery life and screen quality, but it's a portable Sega Genesis from 1995. That's crazy.
But what if we want a little more power with a lot less compromises? Well, say hello to the PS1 LCD monitor, a way to play your favorite PlayStation games on a portable LCD screen as long as you're connected.
One more trip inside and we can play our PS1 games portably. Released alongside the revised PlayStation model was a screen you'd attach with a couple of quarters, plug in and bam! It's honestly incredibly simple and the screen and sound quality is excellent. I love how there's no extra wires, it just plugs in on the back, you plug in an AC adapter and you're playing any PlayStation game you can think of on a mini screen. Now, of course, this isn't completely portable, you need to be plugged into an outlet at all times, but it makes bringing the system around places far easier. You can bring this to a hotel, a cottage, hell, you can get a car AC adapter and play this on the road. The screen attachment business starting to start here. I mean, here's a third-party one for the GameCube, same general idea, but not nearly as well made, simply because the GameCube wasn't designed to work with something like this, the PS1 was. So we have this fun skin growth thing where we have to attach it here and attach this. I think I'm missing a piece. But I recall seeing all these screen cases for your Xbox 360 or PlayStation 3 or Xbox One or PlayStation 4 where it's fundamentally a carrying case with a TV screen built inside. This way your child doesn't have to go, God forbid, a minute talking to people at grandma's. They can just bring their system with them, plug in somewhere, and keep the good times rolling. I mean, I'm guilty of this. Whenever traveling as a kid, I'd always pack up a portable DVD player and season 3 and 4 of Wings. I'd totally be set for not talking to anybody on a trip. God, these cases are overkill. I understand wanting to play your console games on the go, but this isn't that far off from just bringing a TV with you places. Look, come on, nobody wants to lug this around when this offers just as much entertainment. It's just kind of cool to be able to play non-portable games portably, but when that involves carrying around a 50-pound sack, the magic is gone pretty quickly.
See, but these things aren't necessarily portable. They allow you to play your favorite consoles in the corner of your bedroom rather than on the living room TV. What about stuff more in line with the Turbo Express and the Sega Nomad? Well, those things have existence on the menu tonight.
See, the technology required to make something along the lines of a Super Nintendo, yeah, more affordable and compact by the 2010s, definitely more than possible to take that and turn it into a somewhat affordable portable. That's how we got the Superboy by Hyperkin. Let's turn it on. Jeez, I can't see the screen. The sun's too bright.
Son of a bitch!
So the Superboy was released in 2011 and is basically the SNES version of the Sega Nomad. I love how it looks, just like a Super Nintendo controller. We pop in a cartridge and bam, we're playing Super Nintendo games on the go. Sometimes. It may be because I bought this used, but it's a bit finicky and doesn't work properly all the time. The D-pad feels a lot cheaper and more plasticky than the official Nintendo made one, but I mean, this is one of the more legitimate ways to play the official cartridges on the go. But if you really want to play Super Nintendo games on the go, I'm not really sure if you care all too much about authenticity. At this point, you might as well download these games on the 3DS or something. Similarly, we've got the Retro Duo Portable, also built to play SNES games. And the design isn't nearly as charming. It looks like the most generic possible design for video game controller with a screen. But it comes with an adapter to play NES games. Portably, yeah, portably. That reminds me, if you want to play Game Boy games portably, just attach the Super Game Boy to either one of these handhelds, and there you have it. The Retro Duo Portable actually had a fair amount of adapters made for it, so you can play games from all kinds of systems. I'd say if you wanted to play these console games on the go, this one is your best bet. But Hyperkin's still releasing new iterations of the Superboy. This one was the original release. The later models use a widescreen display that stretches out the games. Why? What was the point of this? No Super Nintendo games were widescreen. I get widescreen displays are more readily available than 4x3 displays right now, but why couldn't they have programmed these things to not stretch the games out to fill the screen? God, I am pissed at this thing I don't own. Well, if you just want a portable NES, there's this guy right here, the FC Mobile 2. Look at all this stuff it comes with. Controllers, a gun. Screen's the size of a grape. I mean, it works, but I think it's too small. Like, the screen is minuscule. An NES cartridge is twice the size of this device. I don't see any reason to try to make this as compact as possible so you can fit it in your pocket if in your other pocket you have to store NES carts in it. It sounds really rough and blown out. It just feels a bit too cheap for my liking. But if you really just have to play these games on the go, it works. Though it also smells weird, but I don't know if that's really a point to make talking about video games. So these modern retro console handhelds. They're neat, but I don't see them as anything more than a novelty. Like I said, for people that just absolutely have to play video games via the original cartridges, the retro gaming purists, wouldn't they prefer playing these on a CRT with the best picture quality possible with the original controllers and on officially made hardware and whatnot? It's still amazing to play these games via the original cartridges in the palm of your hands. I mean, that's just pretty neat. But many of these aren't the most well put together, like opening up the Superboy cartridge flap Are those wires supposed to be that visible? Jostling the systems a bit will cause glitches or freeze the games, and plus these cartridges are so big, I can't see anybody actively thinking, finally, I can play these games portably. These carts were not meant to be taken on the road, and these systems are nothing more than a neat little thing. But what if we take more modern systems and make portables out of them? To finally be able to play GameCube and Wii games outside, oh my god, that's the dream! Well, let's talk about these portable consoles we can play outside, but not play them because I don't have them. Look at these, portable homemade GameCubes and Wiis. These are literally dreams come true. Exactly what I wanted as a kid. And these are all fan-made. You need to have an extensive knowledge on how to turn this thing into this thing. I'm telling you, I would have killed for something like this. Sure, Mario 64 DS was great, but playing either of its successors, Sunshine or Galaxy, on the go? Oh. But alas, if you want a portable N64 or GameCube or Wii, you're gonna have to shell out the big bones or have a good idea of what the hell you're doing if you want to put one together. If you want to be more straightforward with this kind of stuff, obviously you could just wait until your favorite console games get remade or ported onto handheld systems. Donkey Kong Country Returns came to the 3DS, Marvel vs. Capcom 3 came to the PlayStation Vita. Sure, these are downgraded in some ways, but literally all of these portable solutions are downgraded in some ways. Yeah, the screen's smaller, the controls may be weird, it's always gonna be different. Of course, that begs the question, what about a console that, right out of the box, can be taken on the go with you? That's right. I'm talking the Wii U. You can plug your Wii U console into a power adapter and it'll still connect to the gamepad if it's close enough. That means for Wii U games you can play directly on the gamepad screen, they're about as portable as the PS1 with the LCD monitor. All you need to do is plug the Wii U in and that's it. It'll still stream video to the gamepad screen with no internet connection, nothing. I've seen dozens of people playing it at the airport or in the car. Maybe less than dozens, but still, it's possible. In the end, home console gaming, while incredible to be seen anywhere but the home, it seems like it's a bit too tailor-made for the TV. Many games like this were made to be played sitting on a couch, connected to the internet at all times, and taking advantage of the horsepower you can achieve with a fat box not having to take a screen and battery life into consideration. Maybe console gaming was just never meant to be played on the go. Oh.
Well, that's a look at console gaming on the go. See, a lot of these things are actually pretty cool, but they have a lot of roadblocks involved, though I'm willing to look past a lot of them. With these portable home consoles, I never have to go indoors ever again!
I still believe that. Look what just happened. Came rain indoors, the outside's amazing. That's right, f you, house.